Let me ask you something. If I say the words, he's on fire, you already heard it, didn't you? Not me saying it, the game saying it.
He's on fire!
You remember exactly how that felt, don't you? NBA Jam came out in 1993. Now me, I can barely remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember what it felt like to play NBA Jam in 1993. It wasn't because it was the most realistic basketball game ever made, far from it, and it wasn't the most technically impressive of its era. But NBA Jam accomplished something that no other game had been able to accomplish up to that point. And once you understand the genius behind its design, you can never look at sports games the same way again. So why did NBA Jam work? We might just say it was because it exaggerated basketball. Huge dunks, barely any rules, just chaos. But here's the thing. Exaggerated sports games weren't new. Midway had already made one. It was called Arch Rivals, released in 1989. 2-on-2 basketball, no fouls, arcade action. Sound familiar? Now, it was fun, and many of us remember it, but it didn't become a cultural icon. The truth is, there were plenty of over-the-top sports games before and after NBA Jam, so exaggeration alone can't be the answer. The question isn't why NBA Jam was exaggerated. The question is, why did this particular exaggeration connect with people in a way almost nothing else did? Let's actually look at what NBA Jam removed from basketball. The fouls were gone, free throws gone, 5 players on each side gone. The ability to elbow and shove your opponent, well, that was fully present. On paper, that's a lesser version of basketball. You've stripped out most of the sport. But players didn't experience it as lesser. They experienced it as more energy, more tension, more satisfaction. By almost every traditional measure, NBA Jam should have felt like less basketball. Instead, it felt more like what people love about basketball. And the interesting thing is, the people who were actually building the game had to fight each other to get there. John Carlton, one of the developers on the project, pushed back hard on the direction it was heading. He said, "I was down on the monster dunks. I loved the NBA for what it was. I didn't want to turn this into a clown show." So the instinct, even inside the team building the game, was toward realism, which tells us something. The direction NBA Jam went wasn't the obvious one. It had to be chosen repeatedly against pushback from people who thought they were building the wrong game. Here is what NBA Jam actually understood. Sports fans don't fall in love with sports because they're realistic. They fall in love with the emotion of sports. The hot streak, the comeback, the impossible shot, the moment when everything is on the line and a superstar delivers. NBA Jam's entire design was built around one question. How do we get players to the next emotional peak and as fast as possible? And once you see that, every decision in the game suddenly makes sense. Why only 2 players? More touches. You're always in the action. You're never watching someone else have a moment. Why no fouls? Fewer interruptions. Nothing kills momentum like a whistle and a trip to the free throw line. Why the absurd dunks? Bigger emotional payoff. A player jumping 20 feet in the air and then throwing down a spectacular dunk doesn't look like basketball. It looks like the version of basketball you remember from the best play you've ever seen, only tuned up to 11. Why he's on fire? Because hot streaks are what fans remember. In 1992, lead designer Mark Turmel and designer Jamie Rivett went to a Burger King in Chicago, specifically to brainstorm a power-up for the game. They had the dunks, they had the license, but Turmel, according to author Rian Ali, was always looking for something that would give arcade players the much-needed instant gratification that's so important. What they landed on was 3 consecutive baskets. That's it, 3 in a row, and your player catches on fire. Unlimited turbo, no goaltending. Basically, you can't miss. Every basketball fan knows exactly what a hot streak feels like. That moment where a player can't miss and the crowd starts to sense something special is happening. NBA Jam didn't just describe it with a name and a sound effect. It made you feel it. The game was engineering emotional peaks in a way players couldn't even see. Most of us also know there was hidden rubber banding code that quietly boosted the losing team to prevent blowouts and keep comebacks alive. So the close game, the comeback, the game-winning shot were not left to chance. The developers were also deliberate about the real players they chose. Turmel and his team spent days going through newspaper box scores to find athletes who would pop, players who were exciting at that moment. The goal was immediate identification. You weren't just playing a basketball avatar, you were Scottie Pippen, you were Charles Barkley. Every design decision was solving the same problem. Does this produce an emotional peak, or does it slow one down? If it slowed one down, it got cut. The design term Midway used internally was exaggerated reality, but that undersells it. This wasn't just exaggeration, it was more like curation. NBA Jam wasn't recreating basketball, it was recreating why people loved basketball. The proof is in what happened when it shipped. NBA Jam launched in arcades in April of 1993. Individual machines were reportedly earning up to $2,400 per week. By most accounts, an all-time record for per-unit arcade earnings in the United States at that point. By the end of 1993, its U.S. arcade revenue had reportedly outpaced the domestic box office of Jurassic Park. You know, the movie with the dinosaurs. Then the console ports hit. Super Nintendo and Genesis in March 1994. 2 million copies sold that year, 4 million within 12 months, over 6 million across both platforms by the time it stopped being counted. But the number that tells you something different is the people who weren't basketball fans playing it anyway. NBA Jam crossed over. People who didn't care about the NBA, who couldn't name 5 NBA players, who had never even watched a game, they played NBA Jam. Because you didn't need to love basketball to feel what NBA Jam was selling. And then there was Shaq. Shaq bought multiple arcade cabinets for his home. He held tournaments. On road trips, he would call contacts in each city to arrange machines in his hotel room. One of the best basketball players on earth became obsessed with a version of basketball that barely resembled real basketball, other than maybe the shattered backboards. Because what NBA Jam had captured wasn't the rules. It had captured the rush. Gary Payton, another NBA superstar, even sent his own photos to Turmel and personally asked to be in the next game. The athletes whose sport was being exaggerated were the game's most devoted fans. That's not a coincidence, it's confirmation. The sport was the vehicle, the feeling was the destination. NBA Jam accidentally exposed a problem the sports genre still hasn't solved. The closer games got to accurately recreating sports, the further they sometimes got from recreating why people watched sports. More players, more statistics, more simulation fidelity, franchise mode, salary caps, broadcast presentation, annual releases with updated rosters. All of it pointed toward recreating the sport more accurately, not more emotionally. Simulation sports games built massive audiences around exactly that promise. And to be clear, that's a legitimate product answering a legitimate demand. There are players who genuinely want the roster depth and the franchise management. That's real. But here's what's interesting. The games that tend to outlast simulations in memory are almost always the ones that did what NBA Jam did. They didn't simulate the activity. They simulated the emotional fantasy of the activity. NBA Jam did it to basketball, NFL Blitz to football. You could even say Mario Kart did it to racing and SSX to snowboarding. We could even throw Tony Hawk's Pro Skater in there and what it did for skateboarding. None of those games necessarily accurately recreate their sport. All of them capture what it feels like to be great at their sport. The speed, the flow, the moment of impossible execution, the crowd's reaction. They're not simulating what you do. They're simulating how it feels at the most exciting moment. And most of them are remembered more vividly than the simulation titles that came out around the same time. The tension between those two approaches, recreate the sport or recreate why people love the sport, has never really been resolved. It's still there. You can feel it every time a sports game ships with 100 licensed features and somehow feels less exciting than a 2-on-2 arcade game from 1993. For 30 years, sports games have been chasing realism. Better graphics, better physics, animations, better simulations. And those games have gotten extraordinarily good at what they set out to do. There's no arguing that. But NBA Jam chased something else. A feeling. Not basketball as it happens, but basketball as it stays with you. The hot streak, the comeback, the impossible shot at the buzzer. Judging by how many people still remember a flaming basketball from 1993, in a genre that has produced thousands of games since, NBA Jam may have understood the feeling of sports better than any other game. Realism was never the point. The point was the feeling. And if that's true, then NBA Jam was never just a basketball game. So, what do you think? Did NBA Jam understand sports better than the games trying to simulate them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you made it this far, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.